Good afternoon, Mr. Ryan. How are you doing today, sir?
Hey, what's happening, Mike? How are you?
Doing well. Here we are, new year, 2023, kicking things off.
Yeah, Happy New Year 2023. You know, when I think about 2023, that number,
Hmm.
as a kid, I imagine we'd be flying around in cars, like it's not electric cars, like we're literally just flying at that point.
Yeah,
But
the Jetsons.
nope. Yeah, we're totally Jetson. 2023 seems so far out there, and then here we are. It's not that much different other than a few innovations that we didn't have when I was a kid.
Yeah, where's my robot that does my laundry? And when I get out of the shower, I just stand there and it dresses me.
Yeah, none of that.
We
Not yet,
missed
at
that.
least. That's scary. Imagine that, like you're going live on Facebook and your robot's broadcasting, you're just simply trying to get dressed. That could
Yeah.
be a disaster.
Malfunctions. That's good.
Yeah.
Anyway, so uh, so going into 2023, I mean, we're still waiting on finalized numbers for how the year ended, but it looks like affordability has improved for our area at least. And that's a combination of prices have come down a little bit, right? The average selling price of homes and interest rates are down a bit, but it looks like the monthly payment is going to be down about $700 a month from kind of where it peaked this year. And that seems to be bringing a lot more buyers into the marketplace. But it seems like we've been having some issues with people qualifying for the lower purchase price at the lower interest rate than we did, several months ago. Do you want to touch on that a little bit and kind of explain what you're seeing on your end?
Yeah, I mean, look, the credit card usage and just general consumer debt, whether it be a car payment, credit card, personal loan, whatever, kind of transpired over the last couple of years,
Yeah.
there was definitely an uptick in that at some point. And we have charts that kind of show like where the floor of that kind of consumer consumption kind of came in
Yeah.
and where it's at now. And it's up about 21% from its low in recent years. So credit cards are starting to kind of become a little bit more of a habit than they were. They were on a nice decline for a little while, and you started to see the savings rate start to improve in households. So credit cards
Hmm.
were coming down and savings were going up.
Yep.
That was really during the whole pandemic thing. And then as we moved away from that, or further and further away from that being kind of a big deal, and stuff was opening up, and um, people started to travel, they started to spend, and they would erode the savings. We're seeing savings rates really dip down quite a bit right now. Part of that is inflation because
Hmm.
everything around us is so expensive that you're not able to put as much money away in savings. The savings rate's down.
Yeah.
We're also seeing that the lifestyle that people are used to isn't really changing. So
No.
got it. A certain lifestyle was everything around us was cheap. Interest rates are cheap. Groceries are cheap. Gas was, let's call it cheap now that we can see what the gas price is today,
Yeah.
but everything was a lot cheaper. And so people are slower to let go of those habits. What they do is they just kind of dump them onto credit cards. And so we're seeing that up about 21% on average. It went from about, like, nationally about $740 billion was kind of the floor.
Hmm.
And we're sitting about 930 billion. That's a ton of money. You're talking almost $1 trillion in consumer credit card debt. That's just credit cards. It's not counting auto loans and things like that.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. We're headed out of the holiday months. This is when most people are spending the majority of their money. Their kids deserve X, Y, and Z. Their spouse deserves X, Y, and Z. And so they spend that money
Hmm.
instead of cutting back during the holidays. They still put it on the credit card. And a lot of times it's 0% for a period of time. And, it kind of kicks the can down the road and they make these minimum payments, but eventually it catches up to you. In one area that I'm concerned about is if you put too much on your credit cards and then you go to apply for a mortgage, whether it be a refinance or a purchase, well, now all of a sudden your ratio of available credit is much, much lower than it probably should be. And your credit score starts to dip. What
Yeah.
happens when your credit score starts to dip? Well, the qualifying gets a little bit tougher. The interest rates get a little higher and the cost gets a little bit higher. And so we're starting to kind of see little glimpses of that. It generally happens around this time of year, but we are seeing a little bit more of that. Even with these glimpses of interest rates starting to kind of ease, we may have hit kind of our peak for
Hmm.
rates. They're starting to kind of roll back a little bit. They're not record lows by any means, but they've definitely shown signs of moving in the direction that we want them to, which is a little bit lower than where they've been at. But you got to be in a good position to take advantage of that. So when that time comes, when you're ready, you can't be stacked full of credit card debt, or you're going to have a little bit of a challenge, right?
Yeah, for sure. So let's come back real quick. So on the credit card, the level of debt on the card, right? Bringing the credit score down. I know there's a sweet spot on your balance of percentage of available credit on the card, where once you cross that threshold, it starts to drop your credit. You want to remind people what that is?
Yeah, I mean, a good rule of thumb is we want to aim for no more than 50% of the available lines. So simple numbers, simple math, simple guy, $1,000 credit card limit. Don't carry more than $500 on it. Now, if you have to, that's okay. It's not the end of the world. It's not like you'll never get those points back. It's just whenever they report to the credit bureaus, it's going to temporarily pull back or dip your credit card, or I'm sorry, your credit score.
Yep.
And so if you can be below that $500 on that $1,000 line, that's your first goal. Your second goal would be to be at 30%.
Mm-hmm.
And then your final goal would be below 10 if you can, erring closer to zero if you really could. You don't have to be that low. I mean, 10% would be great, 30 is great, 50 is okay. Anything above that, you're going to see some decline in your credit score. And guys, you got to remember this too. If you have debt on your credit card and you don't plan on clearing that anytime soon, and we do end up in recession, which a lot of signs are showing that we're headed that direction. One thing that happened many, many years ago during the last recession is that Citibank, Chase, you name it, whatever credit card company you have would cut your line.
Mm-hmm.
They'd roll it back, and they'd roll it back to whatever your balance was. So in that same example, $1,000 limit, $500 balance, you thinking you're doing okay, you're at 50%. You should always aim to get that cleared if you can, because guess what? If things get a little bit tight, the banks don't want to lose any money.
Yeah.
They cut your limits. They don't want you accessing those. If they see people using their credit cards too much and that pace increases too quickly, they're going to roll back and cut limits. When they do that, now all of a sudden you're at 100%. You're like, wait a minute, how's that possible? Well, it's because you don't have $1,000 line anymore. You only have 500. So then your score dips to no fault really of your own, other than you carried the debt.
Yep. Okay, so good, hit that. The other thought I had was, so the level of debt that people have on their credit cards right now is up 21%, right? Let's remind people, like, what's an average interest rate that you're seeing on credit cards right now?
I don't know the real average, national, but I see anywhere from 14.9 to 28% pretty regularly. We tend to, if we're consolidating, we're paying off debt, we like to ask for the statements so that way we can do a really good cursory review and make sure that we're paying off the right debts. And I mean, a lot of times it's deep into the double digits for sure.
For sure. And I want to point that out. And we did a few weeks ago, we pointed that out as well. Or that was probably in October when interest rates were at 7 and a little bit over that. While that number is very high, right? The credit card debt, the interest on that is so much higher. And people, I think maybe because the media wasn't talking about the interest on credit cards, people were like, oh, cool, I'll just use that and runaway debt on that. And a lot of people we've seen get in trouble racking up consumer debt for sure. And like you said, the national average is up 21%. That's scary.
Yeah, they gotta, there's a trick to the take rate. You gotta offer it to somebody in an enticing way. So it's really, really common at the holidays. You're at the checkout line, you're buying those gifts that you just gotta have, and they ring it up and it's $300 and something, if you're lucky. And then they go, hey, you want to save 10% today? Take out this credit card. I can do it really quick. What's your social? And they just literally key it in and then you're approved almost instantly. Well, what happens? Oh, it's 0% for the next 18 months or 16 months or 12 months, whatever deal that they're running at the time. And you get the discount. It's all good, except you got to pay that debt back at some point. And most people start to kind of build, there's a lifestyle creep that sort of happens. Mm-hmm. If you're not diligent about paying that off, all of a sudden lifestyle creep, comes in and you don't have the extra resources to pay it off. And then you end up paying all of the interest over that whole period of time. Not only that, but a lot of times the limit that they give you matches the purchase. So you just threw a grenade into your credit score
Yeah.
because you took out a brand new debt that has no history,
With
and
100%.
you took out like a $330 you put $330 in debt against a $400 credit card line. You look like you're almost maxed out, so
Mhm.
you're losing points there as well. So kind of a bad situation all the way around. But guess what? You save 10%, so it's a good deal, right? That's the trick.
Yep. Okay. So everybody knows that's bad and have been guilty of it. And so moving forward now, back to some of the issues we've seen, let's, if you're out there and you're preparing to, purchase a home, or maybe you've overdone it in building up debt across the board, what would be a good thing? Let's start with the buying side. What would be a good practice or a good plan of action to put into place, just generally, because we know case by case is different for everybody, but just in general, if you're looking to make a purchase sometime this year, now that affordability is up and is expected to be even more affordable as the year goes.
Yeah, I mean, we'll come back with like a full 2023 forecast and where we see things, how you position yourself to win on that. But I mean, at the very basics behind it, we do see things becoming a little bit more affordable. So there's some good news in there for people that are actually out there trying to buy.
Yep.
Let's say you don't own a home at all right now. You're a first time buyer, or you haven't owned a home in years, and all of a sudden you want to get back in the marketplace. One of the concerns is, is this a good entry point? Do I wait? Do I wait
Yeah.
2 years, 3 years, 4 years? So that's where that forecast that we put together will have a lot of details around there to hopefully give you enough data that you can make a decision. This is good for me, yes, or no, I need to hold. And it's going to be, different for everybody. But if you're entering the market and you're carrying maybe some of that credit card debt, don't completely write off a lower down payment option. I've seen people make this mistake all the time. They'll come in, now they get their 20% down.
Mhm.
You don't need 20% down to buy a house, but they don't want to pay PMI. They're like, I'm not paying that. It's a waste of money. My grandpa told me it's a sucker's game.
Yep.
Totally get it. But grandpa also probably didn't carry all the credit card debt, student loan debt, or car payments that you had.
Yeah.
And so look and consider that. I'm not saying you have to pay that stuff off, but there may be one or two of those items, if not all of them, that need the attention first.
Mhm.
You can still buy the house. You can put the down payment maybe just a little bit lower. And there's ways around the PMI game. Like PMI for some people is still a tax deduction, it's still almost treated like interest, but it does phase out. There's an income where it phases out. It depends on, joint or whatever on your
Mhm.
taxes. But if that doesn't apply to you and you feel like it's true waste, there's a way to pay it and wipe it out up front. And sometimes it's not that expensive. It's a couple grand to get rid of the PMI in many cases, versus having to pay it, over and over again, month after month, et cetera.
Yeah.
But you also took all that extra capital and you threw it at this other debt. So you move into the new house really with a fresh slate. You've got your mortgage to worry about, you got your utilities to budget for, and that's about it.
Yeah.
You don't have to carry all the other stuff with you. And a lot of times, even though that payment on that mortgage is maybe just a tad higher than you were kind of expecting or hoping for, it may be cheaper than what you're paying in rent plus all the other consumer items that you have to cover anyways.
Mhm.
So consider that. I want to also kind of mention this too, as you're considering maybe just a payment that's slightly higher than what you're comfortable with. One of the beauties on a mortgage is that you're fixing that payment, your housing payment, you're setting it in stone today.
Yep.
So in the future, may not seem like it 10 years from now or 15 years from now, but you may be very happy with where that payment is. You also have all of that time to reset that debt. I know we've talked about this many, many times. But if the rates get better and you qualify, you get the lower payment now. Your housing payment's going to go down.
Yeah.
You don't have anything really like that. No mechanics really like that on the rental side of things. You could certainly uproot from the home that you're in if rent prices drastically reduced and go rent something else if you wanted to, but we really don't see that. So rent prices are going to start to slow. The escalation of those will start to slow down a little bit in 2023. But they're still incredibly high compared to what people were paying many years ago.
Yeah.
But people that bought, in 2018 or 2019, when the housing market felt very heavy for them at that time, their payments or mortgage payments are significantly less than the rents that would be due on the same kind of house. But at the time they weren't. At the time it was a little bit, kind of want to own. I don't. That was the decision making. It wasn't an affordability thing.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of look a little further down the road to make these decisions. It's not easy to jump into something that's a little bit more expensive, but clearing up some of your balance sheet, getting rid of some of the credit cards and things like that makes for more room for housing.
For sure. So I think back to the example of it's a first time buyer. I think step one that so many people, definitely in business, but even more scary on the personal side, so many people don't have a budget and they don't have any idea of what they shell out every month, right? So I think that is probably a great first step in general, right? And you can do it the old school way and take out your bank statement and highlight all of your expenses and create your monthly budget off of that. Then use that, like you said, to kind of clear up the balance sheet and see what you have outgoing that maybe you don't need, like all of your, streaming subscription services, and maybe people that still have gym memberships that they haven't used since before lockdown that they could free up, $50 a month on that. So with making a budget and, kind of going from there, what else would you say maybe between that and, evaluating, how much of a down payment that they're going to put down on the new purchase? Like what would be some good baby steps in there?
Yeah, I think that's, ultimately what we do on the pre-approval is we're looking at a multitude of different options for somebody, right? They're coming in and saying, I have X amount of dollars, I have a budget kind of in this range. Here's kind of what I'm bringing with me. I have this much going out the door for this car payment or that car payment, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And then there a lot of times in that consultation, there's questions or information given about their job. So
Yeah.
as an example, spoke with somebody earlier today who is a single household that's turning into a double household by summer. So when they're looking at their finances, they're like, hey, I can make this just work on my end. And it is a little bit tight. But come summertime, I got another income coming in. So that will make things significantly better. So I know that I can do it just on my own. And I know it'll be much easier when I have that other, income stream in here. So I'm okay carrying maybe just a little higher on the debt now and knocking out some of that other stuff. So like in their scenario, they were paying off, instead of putting the big down payment, they were paying off a lot of other debt. Still qualifying, just fine. They were okay. But doing it and carrying a higher mortgage than they probably initially sought, like when we first spoke, it's going to go up a bit, but it's going up because they also realize like there's things in their future that are changing. They're not speculation. These are like the specific timelines when things are going to occur. So they're making safe decisions that way. It's not like they're gambling, on something like that. But we talked a while back about like the different house hacking strategies. Does that work? It can. It's not for everybody. Renting rooms and things like that are certainly an option if you're kind of a young single man or woman, right?
Yep.
Trying to make it work, but got a family. It's probably not the most ideal thing is having some random person kind of living in one of your rooms for $500 a month, but
yeah,
it happens and it helps. Merging households are really, really common right now. We're seeing a lot of that. We're seeing where you've got maybe two people getting married, and we just talked about this prior to the call. Is you got a client right now, they're getting married. They each have a house, and instead of moving into one of the others of their houses, they're going to sell both of them, and they're going to buy one nice new house.
Yep.
And really, we're taking a look at what do we do with that equity? Where are they kind of short? Let's take a nice peek at everything. But in that same equation, mother-in-law is moving in, so they need a bigger house because not only are they merging households, but then mother-in-law is coming with them. They need space for her as well.
Yeah.
And so there's kind of this third equation that's in there as well. And really that's because in that scenario, mother-in-law was having a harder time just on her own. Fixed income, we've talked about this a lot.
Yeah.
Income is it's great, secure, but there's no hedge against inflation in any way.
No.
And we know it's really much more expensive today than it was in the past. And so, she has no choice but to liquidate, sell her home, move in with her kids, and make life more comfortable. That's the game that she has to kind of play. It's not like she's going to be able to go back to work at her age, so.
For sure. Let's pause real quick because you triggered a thought that probably doesn't get talked about a whole bunch, but you were given the example of, an additional income coming in summer for the client. and he can afford the house by himself, and it might be a little bit tight, right? But can do it, and doesn't have the stress of it because he knows he's got other income coming in the future. I'm curious to know how often people are comfortable with, or even presented with, the idea of, if the husband is going to buy the house, maybe not putting the wife on the loan and him buying that house there, and then kind of like a hack, right? A financing hack, because the wife has her own income and she's coming in. He can afford it, and they'll probably mingle funds and, do that thing. But if the husband has 100% responsibility for that debt, so I guess people don't know that if a husband and wife go on a loan, they both have 100% responsibility for that debt, right?
Right.
So maybe how often does it come up that maybe only the husband buys the house, and if it's a primary, and they don't put the wife on the loan, and they use that for the wife to be able to purchase an investment property in just her name. And maybe the housing, maybe using the house as an example is probably not the best, but like a car, like what kind of advice would you give towards that?
Yeah.
Like because both people, and I don't think people understand that, but they both get 100% liability for the debt. Like it's not 50-50. It's not like, oh, it's a $300,000 mortgage, so I only have to, have 150 against my, debt to income ratio, and she has 150.
Yeah, that happens all the time. I mean, there's a million scenarios, but what I kind of hear you saying on that one, and just to kind of put it into a scenario that everybody can kind of understand, would be, let's say you have a joint household, they buy a home, in this case, $300,000 for them to live in.
Yep.
It's probably they probably bought in like 2014 for
Yeah.
300 grand, but let's just say they bought for 300 grand. So they bought for $300,000. It's joint household, and now one of them wants to go and buy an investment property on their own. The entire liability of the home that they own together, that's joint, is used in the qualifying for that other person to go buy, unless they go buy together. So we do hear quite often, it's like, well, that's my husband and I, that's our house. I'm the only one buying this investment property. Why am I, debt ratio's tight? Why am I having to float that? My husband has an income. We can use the income if that person's going on the loan, but if they're not going on the loan, we're not using that income to offset any of the joint liability. And that does apply for everything. So you could have a credit card that's joint between two people. You could have a car payment that's joint between two people. Now, there are some situations where you can show that somebody else has made the payment. So I have seen where they, households, it's not common, but they do run totally separate budgets. You have let's just say a husband's bank statement and liabilities, and a wife's bank statement and liabilities. Some of the liabilities are joint, but let's say the husband pays for the car. It's joint, but he pays for it over a period of time. The wife is going to apply for, say, an investment property. We can ignore that debt if we can trace it back to always being paid by the husband, right? If they're not listed on each other's bank statements, there's no commingling of funds. In some cases, some programs, conventional loans specifically, government loans, it really doesn't matter. It's joint, right? We're in a community property state here in California, so it really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You're looking at that joint household. The other one that we get quite a bit is, I'm going to buy the home just on my own. So like in my case, I'm going to buy it just on my own. Not going to put my wife on title or on the loan, because I want her to take advantage of a first-time buyer program like in a year. So
that's what I was alluding to, is this scenario.
Okay. We hear that one all the time, and really that one doesn't really work out so well. I think the idea is that I'm going to own this home. My wife doesn't own a home. She's going to be a first-time buyer.
Yep.
But you're in a community property state and you have interest. I mean, you're not on title and you're not on the loan, but this is your primary residence. It's on your tax return. The address is probably in your pay stubs. It's probably in your W-2s. It's literally everywhere in your life.
Yeah.
It's really hard to tell an underwriter, like, I'm going to buy in that one. I'm a first-time home buyer. Technically, you don't have interest unless so if you filed like head of household taxes totally, and then separate tax returns, one would have interest, mortgage interest, one would not. There could be something there. So where you could claim there was no mortgage interest, there's no interest at all on the property. I think it's really kind of pushing it. to be honest, you have a just as easy of a time kind of explaining the fact that, hey, we bought this home, we lived in it for a year. We want to put a low down payment, not a down payment assistance. We want to do a low down payment, maybe 5%
Yeah.
on this other house. We're going to rent this one. I see people do that all the time. That's totally fine.
Yeah. And those are easier to
Great.
fix because like how it's like 25 or 50 miles away. Like there's like a distance rule, right? And it has to be a change in house, like whether it be downsizing or significantly upsizing. Like there's just a couple easy things that you can argue, and you can purchase a new property with a lower down payment as your new primary and keep the other one. And that's
So the
probably a heck of a
distance
lot
is
easier.
really the distance is like an FHA product. So let's say
Okay.
you put 3.5% down FHA loan or whatever the down payment was, doesn't matter. If it was an FHA loan when you bought your home, now you want to buy another one,
Yep.
then you have a distance challenge, right? So you're either relocating or there's a distance challenge, which is saying I have to use this low down payment option, this FHA product
Yeah.
again. They won't let you just kind of arbitrarily convert that to move down the street, do another FHA loan. But you could do a conventional loan. You could do FHA, decide you're going to rent it a year later and go conventional 5% down on the next property
Yeah.
down the street. You wouldn't have the mileage challenge or you wouldn't have the relocation issue. It just has to make sense. I remember a guy, we had a client, long story short, bought in the period of 3 years, I think they bought 4 homes, all of them 5% down. Every time it was like, cross town, or they would just kind of, they started to kind of scale up. So the first one was kind of entry level, a little nicer than that one, a little nicer than that one. And they kept all these for rental properties over time. They haven't bought in a while. Like this last and final move was the one that they planned to be in for a very long time, but they had all these like rental properties, and these ran really, really tight. There wasn't a lot of cash flow on them. They were able to use departing residents to offset, but today they're cash flowing really nicely. And their housing costs, I mean, it really made sense for them, but they took a little bit of a gamble to kind of pull that off. It worked out just fine. It was part of kind of an overall plan that they had put together to acquire properties. They just didn't have 20% a pop to go buy these investment properties. They were just doing 5% down at a time. Owner occupied, converted, owner occupied, converted. You really want to just stay in that property. You don't want to do that right away. And that's going to be mortgage fraud, occupancy fraud.
Yeah.
You want to stay in that property for 12 months. You stay in it for a year, go to the next one, you're fine.
Yeah.
No problem. You don't have to refinance it into investment. You just keep the same loan, move on to the next one.
Yep. Okay. So sorry for that rabbit trail, but now back to preparing for 2023, get an idea of what your income and outgo is, right? Create your budget. Come in and know what your debts are, right? And with credit card, and know if there's any debts that you need to tackle coming in that will help offset your debt to income ratios and qualifying for the house, right? What's another baby step if you're a first time buyer coming in?
I like to tell people to simulate the new mortgage. And so if they're talking to us early, we kind of forecast out where we think those payments might be based on the type of home that's going to fit their family need.
Yep.
And then like somebody I talked to earlier today was at $2,200 a month on rent. They're looking at $3,200 on their new mortgage. And so until they get that new mortgage, every time they make rent on the first of the month for $2,200, we're telling them, hey, throw that extra $1,000 into a savings account and do that over and over again. If you're 6 months out, we're going to have $6,000 to help you with your move, help you with closing costs, help you buy the fridge and washer dryer, whatever it is, whenever you go and buy that house. Now, if you find that you can't do 1,000 every month, you did 1,000 one month, you could only do 5 the next, we need to figure out why. So what we're constantly doing is retesting. Couldn't do the 1,000 I was supposed to, which would have been what my mortgage would have been. Life would have got tough. What would have happened?
Yeah.
I would have had to go to credit card. Why? What interrupted that? Why could you only do 500 that month? Oh, I needed tires on my car. You're going to need tires in your car in the next 30 years. So when you have a mortgage, you're going to probably need that again and again, right? So these things happen and we have to plan for them. So we need to readjust the budget a little bit. We just have to kind of circle back. How do we adjust it? What else can we trim? Where can we trim some fat? Can we still do 1,000? And the answer sometimes is no. Maybe it needs to be $700 or $800 on top of that 22. Maybe $3,200 a month is not in their range right now. Maybe they need to focus on like 28, 29. So those are good tests to do. you got to get really, really clear on where all the money's going. I'm telling you, like we're on a call like this telling people, hey, a storm's coming, take some shelter. There, you've got to clear up whatever you have that doesn't need to be, you don't need to be spending money on. You need to
Yeah.
clear up those additional debts so that you can afford the essentials, which is going to be your housing.
And here's the worst, or here's the best part of the worst case scenario of that, I guess, is they trim all the fat, right? And because we've been talking about this for at least a year now, like winter is coming, like we've been talking about it. It's here, people are feeling it. So maybe we sounded crazy in the beginning, but again, if we were wrong and they cut all this, expenses and everything, what's the worst possibility out of that? You saved a bunch of money, you have less overhead, you realize you didn't need 12 streaming services. Like, that doesn't sound so bad to me, versus the alternative, like you don't listen and you just keep running wild and keep spending money, and then you're broke and now you have to sell your house, like, to just make it. So I think coming into the new year, especially watching everything that happened last year, if they didn't already listen, now would be a good time, and it's never too late to start.
Yeah, I mean, 2023, beginning of the year is really a good time for people to kind of do a little bit of a reset. It's already on our mind. We have resolutions most of the time. We have intentions that we want to do throughout the year.
Mm-hmm.
And in the financing space, I would challenge people to really take a good look at where things are going. And with that, is your current housing situation appropriate? Are
Yeah.
you too big? Are you too small? Are you worried about your landlord cranking rent up? Are you just kind of getting by with the house that you just bothers the heck out of you? It doesn't fit your family anymore. You guys are on top of each other. These are things that the sooner you start to plan for the solution behind it,
Mm-hmm.
the better off you are, because then you'll know when the time is to take advantage of that. And it's not the time for, like, every person doesn't come to us and we tell them to sell and move up. Like, sometimes there's a different solution. Or somebody that's renting to buy, we may say continue to rent. Like, it's
Yeah.
not a good time for you to buy. But there's plenty that should make a move, but they're scared, and we can try to help. Show them why I hear why you're scared, and here's some areas that might make things just a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah. And one more thing on timing, like you said, it's the beginning of the year and people have their resolutions and all that stuff. Another good thing is if they're needing to shore up some debt and it's not a massive amount, or maybe they don't have a lot of money saved for their down payments, right? What happens between February and April for most people?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully they're getting some refunds, right, on their taxes. A lot of people bank on that. So we see people carry debt
Mm-hmm.
the majority of the year, and they bank on the tax refund to wipe that out and shore that up. So unfortunately, that's kind of a practice that's done. It's displayed more often than not. But
Yeah.
If that's what works for you, great. Just make sure that that's where that money's going. It's not going to that new 85-inch TV.
For sure. But now being the time, like, you don't have that money in your hand, and maybe that was your original intention, was like, oh, I'll get my refund and I'll pay this stuff off, right? But maybe things are a little bit tight right now, or you're eyeballing a new toy, right? Or some shiny object, and you're like, I know, I'll take that money and I'll throw it at that. If you have the plan and you have the budget coming into the new year, and again, the timing is right, it'll just help you. It'll keep you accountable to doing it, and it'll maybe give you better insight on why it's a good idea to pay off that debt, or make sure to save that money to do your down payment. Or if you're moving, if you're going to rent, you need that money for your first and last, just things like that. Like, if you don't have a destination of where you're going, you're just going to wander wherever the heck you feels good, right? And you'll just be stuck wherever you end up. So coming up
Yeah,
with a plan.
you got to have a good plan. You mentioned rent. I want to touch on that real quick, because a lot of times we plan to buy a house.
Mhm.
So we start to save to buy a house, but we rarely, when people are renters, it's not very common for them to plan for the next rental.
No.
And I'll tell you guys, when you're dealing with 24, 26, 28, $3,000 a month rents, when the landlord asks for the first, the last, and security, that hurts. What are you going to put it on? Are you going to put it on a credit card? That's not a good idea. So you need a good chunk of money just to move from one place to the other. And guess what? You have full control when you're a homeowner, whether you're going to do that or not. When you're a tenant, your landlord is the one at any given time that's going to go, you have 60-day notice here.
Yeah.
You got to be out in 60 days. You go, 60 days, that's not enough time. Not enough time to save my money. We just talked to somebody earlier today who gave notice, as a landlord, gave notice to their tenant. And the tenant is asking now, who's been given like a 3-month lead time, is asking to push it until the middle of summer because they don't have the money for first, last, and security to move out.
That was, dude,
That's
happened.
not his fault, is the landlord. I mean, the guy gave him 3 months.
And it happened literally, I experienced it literally dozens of times during lockdown. Like every investor or landlord that came to me was like, Mike, I got this rental that I got to get rid of, and I'm scared because the eviction moratorium and they're not paying rent, blah blah blah, right? And the conversation became like, hey, look, like even if this is your best friend that's living in the house, and you say, hey, look, I want to sell the house. You're like, great, you've been awesome to me. Let me go find a new place to live, right? I'm paying $1,500 a month right now. Like, I'll figure it out. Let me go find it. I'll get back to you. They come back and they go, I can't. Rent's $2,500 a month. And on top of that, I didn't save the money for the first and last and security deposit and pet deposit, whatever it is, right?
Right.
And so not a lot of times, but there were several times out of those dozens of experiences that I had during lockdown that I told the landlord, I'm like, look, like you need to offer them some money, like offer them up the $5,000 or whatever it is. Like, hey, you've been great. You're wonderful. But if you can find a place to live, like I'll help cover your security and your down, and let's go. Right. And now as a tenant, that's not there anymore, right? Like the eviction moratorium, I think, is up now, and it's just not as scary of a time, and there's not as much free money getting thrown at people to keep them in place. So those options are kind of gone. So don't think that that's your new play for 2023, but it happened a lot. And the point being is I just saw so many people that didn't have the money to even be able to afford the new rent, and for sure didn't have enough money saved to cover their relocation expenses just to move in, let alone moving truck and all of that. So planning for that is very wise.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're renting right now and you're considering buying a house, or even if you're not considering buying a house, you still need to shore up whatever you can, get a little bit of an emergency fund kind of set aside, because your time's coming at some point, right? Maybe it's here in 6 months, the landlord knocks on the door, gives you notice, and maybe it's 6 years from now. We don't know. What I will tell you is if your rent is incredibly cheap compared to market, you should be concerned, because the landlord can only raise rates, the rental income or the rental rate that he's charging you by a certain amount. CPI plus was it CPI plus 5%,
Yep.
Up to 10%. That's your cap.
Yep.
So basically right now, because CPI plus 5 is over 10%, any landlord in the country is going to raise rent 10%.
Well, and they can only raise it the 10% to the existing tenant.
To the existing tenant,
they
correct.
can choose to not renew a lease and
Correct.
make them sign a new lease, like play the shell game, but it's going to be for way more than the 10%.
Right. Yeah. So if you've got somebody, you're expired on your lease, now you're month to month, they can go 10%, you're okay. Right. But you're going to get hit with 10% increase in your rent. And you better believe, like, if you're paying $1,400 a month in rent and you look around and you can't find anything for less than $2,400,
yeah,
the landlord's going to do it this year. It's going to do it next year. It's going to do it the year after until he gets caught up. Or the alternative is to give notice, remove you, and replace you with somebody that he can get $2,400 from right away. So that's kind of the thought pattern behind the landlord. And so if you're a tenant, you need to be aware of that, because I think a lot of times we get this, sounds bad, but like a victim mode. It's like, oh my gosh, the landlord just took out of nowhere. I've been paying for 5 years and now they want to raise the rent. That's dirty landlord. It's like, no, hold on. It's fair, because they should have increased. They didn't. They gave you some grace over the last 4 or 5 years. Let's kind of look at it from a different lens.
Yeah.
And then when they see it like that, they're like, yeah, you're right. I just can't afford to move up, because there's a lifestyle built around that housing payment. So that can be the scary thing. And we realize that, for housing affordability is whether it be renting or buying, is tough for some people, especially if you're caught kind of in those lower cost of living situations. You may not be able to buy anything. Like you may not qualify, or you may not be able to afford anything. We get it. But it doesn't mean that you just kind of throw your arms up in the air and give up. You still have to do some work, because that same situation may come around because your landlord is going to increase on you or is going to give you the notice.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. I think we're good for that for today. Unless you have any final touches on planning for 2023 from a purchasing standpoint.
No, we'll come up with, I think you and I discussed maybe a little series that you kind of wanted to introduce, especially around this time of year. I think it kind of ties in well with what we're talking about from a budget perspective, right?
Yep. So, okay, so for now, for the buying idea and the preparation and coming into 2023, we'll call it a wrap. If you guys have any questions, thoughts, concerns, you want to set up a time to talk to us just to even play through a scenario that's more tailored to your needs and your expenses, obviously that's what we enjoy doing. And we would love to help you, and that's free. Like, we're not charging people to do that. But if you have any questions that you think would be good for broad purpose as well, just let us know. And we're gonna, like Ryan said, start developing out a little series on, being prepared financially for the recession and the future. And we'd love to cover those topics for you guys as well.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
All right, Ryan, thanks. Have a good day, sir. And I will talk to you again soon.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks.
Bye.
See you guys.